Welcome back to another episode of Story Explained. Today, I'm excited to finally cover the sequel to my very first video, The Suffering, Ties That Bind. Still made by Surreal Software and released back in 2005, it sees our main man Torque back and on a mission to track down the mysterious figure known as Blackmore, a notorious drug kingpin. This journey takes Torque on a much darker adventure through the rundown urban streets of Baltimore. I have a lot to discuss regarding this game, so be sure to stick around until the end for my thoughts. Before we dive in, I want to address a significant mistake that I made in the original Suffering video. I mistakenly stated that the good ending is the canon ending. I somehow got my memories of how the sequel begins mixed up, which would throw off a lot of this game's story. So for that, I apologize. Let's take a moment to recap the true ending of the first game before diving into the details of this one. So sit back, relax, and try not to suffer through the ties that bind. At the end of the first game, Torque confronts the Beast, a large symbolic representation of his anger. After defeating it, we learn through a flashback the very real truth that, just as the story said during one of Torque's rage blackouts, he had a violent confrontation with his wife Carmen during an argument. In the chaos, he pushes her, causing her to fall headfirst onto the corner of a nightstand. This injury led to her bleeding from her head and ultimately resulted in her death. Tragically, the children were at home during this incident. Even worse, their oldest son Corey witnessed the entire event. In a crazy turn of events, drowns his own little brother Malcolm in the bathtub while the child was washing up. Overwhelmed by grief and anger, Corey then runs to his bedroom, jumps out of the window, and takes his own life as a way to retaliate against Torque for what he's done. Torque snaps back to the present, where a Coast Guard arrives to take him off the island as the sole survivor of the Carney Island incident. On the boat ride, the Coast Guard mentions that there are police waiting for him at the dock, since escaping the island doesn't mean he's any less guilty of the crime he committed. Torque sneaks up behind the Coast Guard and knocks him out, taking control of the boat and sailing off into the distance to try to find some semblance of freedom. We're not too far away. The sequel begins. On the boat ride, Torque begins mentally recounting the events taking place in his early days in the Eastern Baltimore Correctional Facility, 5 years ago, when his family was still alive. He remembers playing chess with his friend Miles, who spoke of a man named Blackmore, a notorious local drug dealer. Miles believes Blackmore is responsible for Torque's imprisonment due to the weird circumstances that we'll get to see a little later. In the background, Torque watches as the other inmates gather together and leave all at the same time. Since this is before Torque went mute from the trauma he experienced, we hear his very first and last spoken words.
Looks like trouble.
What a poet. Even some corrections officers leave as the prison gang enters the yard, led by a man with a full face of scars and the most villainous look possible. That's Blackmore. Some of Blackmore's men carry weapons, so we know this won't be a peaceful conversation. When the inmates surround Torque and Miles, Blackmore's grunts declare that he owns Eastern now, and even owns Miles and Torque. Miles objects and verbally defends Torque, even though Torque could easily just speak for himself at this point. Blackmore tries to get into Torque's head by mentioning Carmen and how she left Torque, a reference to the fact that she served him the divorce papers this morning. This obviously pisses him off, and he stands up and tries to protect his friend, but Blackmore knocks him down. Blackmore then orders his men to finish them, but just as they're about to fight, a riot erupts. Inmates run rampant, causing fires, and the guards are shooting at everyone who even remotely looks like a threat. Miles and Torque flee through the prison in search of an escape route, but they get separated when I get distracted by picking up the love of my life, the shotgun, which is just as great as ever. Without Miles, Torque is forced to explore the prison, seeing hallucinations of masked dogs and a tall masked man pointing a gun at him. Entering into a pitch black room, the lights turn on, and Blackmore's men are holding a corrections officer hostage. They offer Torque a chance to join their gang by killing the guard. The morality choices are back, but regardless of what he chooses, the guard will always die, and the door will be ripped out by a new, funky-looking creature before it scurries off. Outside the room, Torque hears a woman's sad voice crying about how she's been cut deep. Getting close enough, he has a vision of a disgusting large man with what looks like another human's face attached to his own, Leatherface style. The man attacked the woman for what sounds like his own enjoyment. Torque continues onward before getting trapped in between jail cells as Miles tries to find him a way out. Shortly after, he's attacked by more inmates at the order of Blackmore. After some fighting, Torque finally transforms into his beast form, which now looks more deranged, spiky, and covered in blood. It tears through the gang members with ease until Blackmore himself enters and calmly walks towards Torque, forcing him out of his rage and passing out as Blackmore comments,
"Here I am, my little one."
Wake up, T. Come back to the present.
The sound of Carmen's voice jolts Torque awake in the present as he speeds through the open ocean in the same boat he used at the end of the first game, with the guards still knocked out in the back. Carmen's body appears in the ocean, telling him that there's nothing left for him in Baltimore and that returning would only create new problems for him. How right she is. As soon as she finishes speaking, a spotlight from a military helicopter shines down on Torque. The helicopter demands that he dock the boat immediately. Being the badass that he is, Torque initially tries to outrun it. However, he quickly realizes that doing so would be a death sentence, so he decides to dock the boat where military soldiers are waiting for him. After seeing some visions, Torque passes out once again, something that'll happen quite often. He wakes up strapped to a dolly as the soldiers escort him to their destination for a debriefing about the events of the first game. During the journey, they inform him that he is the prime target for someone named Jordan, who has a deep interest in the malefactors. All of these military personnel belong to the Foundation, an independent paramilitary group dedicated to studying the malefactors. At this point, we meet Jordan, the head of the group, who has specifically requested that no harm comes to Torque. She briefly explains her personal interest in the malefactors when suddenly the facility's power cuts off. She is immediately evacuated from the site for her safety, leaving Torque in the dark, still tied up. The soldier who's supposed to guard the exit door is eviscerated in an instant by the beast, much like how Torque was released by the same creature in the first game. Torque grabs a gun harness from the dead guard, and over the radio, he hears the guards report that both he and the malefactors they had captured for study have escaped. Following the beast as it leads him into a tunnel, Torque is ambushed and, yes, you guessed it, another blackout. I told you this would happen a lot. He wakes up in a different part of the tunnel and, with the guidance of Carmen, is led towards the direction of his old apartment. Along the way, seeing the creepy leather-faced man and a new masked, rifle-carrying guy again. I'm not sure if the cities always look like this, but you already get a sense of hopelessness as he runs through trash and scrap littered all over, boarded up buildings and graffiti covering almost every single wall. And making it inside the apartment isn't any better. The dead air in the house was only drowned out by an unbearably loud sound of a train, only separated by a single wall. Everything is falling apart. Was it always this way? Carmen calls Torque to the bedroom, seeing the nightstand in the same disturbed spot it was left after she fell onto it. Inside the closet are letters revealing that Miles, true to his word, is actively investigating Blackmore, and a note showing Carmen served her divorce papers to Torque. Reading them triggers a vision of Carmen, blaming Torque for not acting against Blackmore's threats, causing him to target the kids instead, making the issues even bigger over time. A very distinct and familiar voice then rings out over the silence. It's Dr. Killjoy. Killjoy still wants to understand Torque's mind and drip feeds him information over time. In this instance, he learns that Blackmore targeted his son Corey first by sending him emotionally manipulative letters before escalating it later. Enduring enough torment, Torque leaves the building as it bursts into flames, and he touches the street of Baltimore for the first time in years. Things are not looking too good. Cars careening off the road and derailed trains are the city's landmarks now. Malefactors peek around the corners, and the sound of arguing nearby forces Torque to investigate, finding a man laying over a giant, glowing hole in the ground. He peers down into the hole. Until something looks back. The Slayers are back, and sporting an updated look too. The malefactors are all different from their counterparts on Carnate Island. Whereas the Slayer was the result of historical decapitations, these new Slayers are tied to Baltimore's knife-wielding gang members. Hordes of them crawl out of the hole and scatter across the city, and Torque enters a nearby shop to find Killjoy, inviting him to a local theater to find a dire solution to a dire problem, aka Blackmore. Torque also meets his old friend Hajira, who helps him reach the theater as he grabs some olives for the road. Don't worry about that. On the way, Hajira tells a story of the Gorgers, creatures born from the Great Depression fairy tales, representing starvation and cannibalism. The story goes that in times of true famine, when there was no food left to eat, families would decide to avoid telling the truth of the real issues, and so they would simply say that Gorgers came and ate everything. Pretty sad when you think about it. Making things worse, the citizens of Baltimore also fell victim to a reverend in the 1940s, who fed the community some soup made out of human meat to end the starvation. Sometimes, reading a fairy tale too many times can cause it to come true, and that's exactly what happens as a real Gorger appears. With Hajira's help, Torque decimates them and continues to the theater. A building spontaneously erupts into a huge flame, giving way to a new malefactor, the arsonist. Similar to the Inferno from the previous game, these are no longer little girls, but squatter victims who were burned alive in freak accidents as they hid in abandoned buildings all over the city, perpetually engulfed in flame, and my shotgun is the extinguisher. Torque approaches the theater. A cool detail is that the movie posters lining the walls are a film named The Beast in Me, starring Torque, Blackmore, and Killjoy. Can you guess what's about to happen? Killjoy welcomes Torque, and Blackmore takes over the show. He wants to provoke Torque's anger, unleashing the beast within. Torque fights waves of enemies, trying to hold out as long as he can. But there's only one way to solve this problem, so Torque unleashes his inner creature. Exiting the building after that experience, I have to give it a 1 star. Worst theater ever. Killjoy shows up on another TV and invites Torque to the quote, Temple of Self-Medication. A rehab center, probably. Torque finds a boy, Kyle, tweaking off something, hallucinating that Torque's his father and that he needs an escort to the temple. On their way, they end up in the middle of a confrontation between cops and a brand new creature. A large one, definitely the most difficult enemy in the game by far. Standing on spider-like legs with enough rifles to equip a small army. In the center of the beast is a human body riddled with holes and a chunk of its brain missing. We can find the Trigger Man, an abomination that is similar to the Marksman, embodying homicides committed by gunshots. In the park, he can find a location where he met Carmen for the very first time under a gazebo, where Blackmore shows up in a flashback, ruining the reminiscing moment by telling Torque that he needs to be unattached and not allow anything to distract him, seeming like he's trying to shape him into joining the gang and that they've worked together before, if them conversing is anything to go by. On the other side of the fence is Jordan, telling Torque that she wants to figure out what defines his dementia. Behind her, the stolen-faced man creeps up to her. Jordan quickly climbs a ladder to escape. The man then gives us a closer look at himself as he pulls a woman's dead body from his coat, and it looks to be attached to his body, a blade suggestively sticking out of her mouth. Yeah, you heard that right. He chokes her while referencing Torque's mental state before vanishing. Getting as far away from that freak as possible, Kyle and Torque almost get to their destination, where Killjoy appears and tells Torque that he will have to explore his inner child, his angry child, which forces Torque to battle a new version of Malefactor. They look just like all the other ones that we've encountered, but these are enveloped in a darkness that can only be killed in his beast form. As a reward for his twisted little games, Killjoy directs us to our old friend Miles' nearby bar, since he might have some more answers on Blackmore's whereabouts. But first, let's talk about this next section. How and Torque finally arrive at the temple that Killjoy mentioned. I initially thought that it would resemble a church, but instead, it's a crack den. A range of drugs litter the ground, accompanied by people who are completely out of their mind. And there are even some dead bodies serving as grim decorations, with heroin syringes still protruding out of their body. Al rushes to a specific room, clearly familiar with the layout from having visited here often. As we follow him, we hear the deafening sounds of a shotgun blast. Upon entering the room, we see the victim of the shooting. Kyle's oblivious, fixated instead on getting himself a good old-fashioned injection. Once he's shot up, he finally notices his supposed friend Freddy, who's missing several facial features. Next to Freddy, a large pool of blood begins to form, and since malefactors thrive in places steeped in pure evil and desperation, something Torque knows well starts to emerge. Mainliners are as ugly as ever, and by taking care of it, he can continue through the rooms, catching a glimpse of a flashback of Blackmore, directing Corey to beat up Malcolm, which very questionably he does. Exiting that dreadful place, we see a Foundation soldier crawl away from collapsing. From what, you might ask? Well, a travesty, since while most malefactors get an introductory video that I like to show because they're cool, my personal favorite Marksman doesn't receive the same love. Instead, with a precariously placed turret, this is what we get.
Look at the mess with my book.
Torque enters the underground, Miles' bar, for some important plot information. The day that Blackmore sent that threatening letter to Carmen about how he was going to target their kids, Torque and Miles were at the bar discussing it, when Blackmore walked away in the background before his hired thug provoked Torque into a fight. That was a bad idea. Torque wins that fight by KO, lying in a pool of blood as the police storm in out of nowhere at the perfectly wrong time. They arrest Torque and Miles, with Blackmore watching smugly. That's how they ended up in the beginning of the game playing chess, before the Eastern Correctional riot broke out. Back in the present, he goes outside and sees Miles on the balcony. Torque follows him and sees these dogs with human faces and knives attached to a mask, called Maulers. They seem to be controlled by a rifle-toting masked man that we've seen before. His name is Copperfield, and he appears to be a slave hunter, using the dogs as scouts as he carries out his sadistic hunts for his own enjoyment. From here, Torque fights rides through soldiers and malefactors until he finds the end of a street and Miles on the other side. Approaching him, an absolute behemoth of a worm erupts from underground, creating a giant gorge between them. Torque has no choice but to jump into the hole and explore around as Miles helps lead him back above ground. Some Foundation ambushes and an It reference later.
Y'all float down here.
Torque rises back onto solid ground long enough to see Miles get attacked by Copperfield, causing him to panic and run. At the same time, we finally get a name for Mr. Leatherface, who we see surrounded by dead corpses of women not too far away. His name is the Creeper, or more specifically, Luther Stickwell. The legend says he was a pimp who had an insatiable hatred for women. When things were all said and done, his murder count was somewhere between 50 to 200 women all over Baltimore. I imagine when the real Luther died, the spirit of malevolence that fuels the malefactors brought him back, focusing only on his murderous instincts. He's definitely the grossest part of the game, and his psychotic mood swings and general demeanor are just completely grotesque for a glorified serial killer incel. If Torque continues on, he'll end up right back at the warehouse that he was at the beginning of the game. Right before he steps inside though, he hears Blackmore's voice taunting him for the 100th time that his family's dead before his trademark blackout, where Torque wakes up inside the building instead of outside. A woman's voice is heard in one of the malefactor captured containers. So he frees her to find out who it is. It's Consuela Alvarez, and if that name sounds familiar, that's because she's the wife of Ernesto Alvarez, Torque's death row escort CO, and eventual friend by the end of the first game. At some point between helping Ernesto escape and Torque defeating the final boss, Consuela was captured by the Foundation, so we made it our duty to get her out of this hellhole just like we did her husband. Walking into the next room, the doors close behind us, and the Foundation is here. Blackmore also makes an appearance. They want Torque dead, and Blackmore wants him to learn his lesson. If they survive an onslaught of different enemies, Consuela, being a woman, will attract the attention of the Creeper, who unsuccessfully tries to abduct her as she looks away. They both escape to the docks, and Torque releases an emergency boat for Consuela to sail off. I've always wondered if she ends up reunited, but we never get to know, and maybe that's for the better. Out of nowhere, Jordan drives her truck into a fence, rescuing Torque from the Foundation, who are throwing everything they have at him. While Torque is shooting creatures, Jordan explains that they're headed to a deep underground part of Eastern Baltimore Correction, since Blackmore controls everything from there, and he's been funding the Foundation, while Jordan foolishly never asked where the money comes from, since her only concern was researching the malefactors, and now it seems that that money is now paying for her men to turn on her. So, quite poetically, we head back to Torque's depressingly familiar environment. Or, at least we were. He falls off the truck and keeps moving, ending up being held at gunpoint by a woman. And what happens to women in this game? Jordan picks Torque back up, and nearly at Eastern, they're attacked by that giant worm again. It's called the Horde, and it looks to be made of a variety of animals, most likely representing the city's rampant mob riots. Most infamously, an event 80 years ago where a group of enraged people lynched some helpless victims for a crime no one even remembers. The malefactors reincarnated the mob to be forced to forever direct that indiscriminate anger towards the world. Torque falls out of the truck again and enters the prison's underground near the library. A new malefactor shows his face, or the lack thereof, the Suppressor, an embodiment of the corrections officers' riots and police brutality in Eastern. They're completely blind, an allusion to the blind eye they'd turn to some of the heinous goings-on in the prison. Miles radios Torque. He wants to meet in cell block E and has some important information he wants to share. Why not tell Torque right now? Stop asking questions. A few rooms later, Torque meets a nervous Warden Elroy Jr., the son of the late Warden of Eastern, who died during a prison riot. He asks for help, so Torque obliges. Keeping Elroy Jr. alive is a pain in the ass, but this is for the good of Baltimore. A little further in, both Torque and Elroy make it to a lunchroom where, behind a door, we hear what sounds like an argument going on. Elroy reacts, traumatized to the sound, so Torque goes through alone to find what the issue is. Opening the door, the room is empty until he walks further in and sees the flashback of Elroy Sr., and we see the incident that eventually cost him his life. They had inmates pinned up against the walls with guns pointed at them before opening fire and killing them all, resulting in a huge riot that targeted the warden. Elroy Jr. snaps out of it, and they continue on until Copperfield shows up and sicks some dogs on Torque to try to slow him down, which doesn't work. They then both meet up with some other prison guards who don't shoot because they recognize Elroy, although it sounds like they much preferred Senior instead. Further up, I actually get the shit scared out of me by something I didn't expect. Miles turns up on the radio again, and this time he seems a little irritated, rushing Torque and telling him that he's going to tell him what he knows, and then Torque's going to explain it to him. So we show Elroy and some inmates the way out, and carry on by ourselves. It doesn't take long to find him, and his aggressiveness is even more obvious now. So we have a long needed one-sided talk.
Hold up. Right there before I snap this hammer down. It's been years, man. Years I've been trying to get the straight word on Blackmore. And what the fuck is up with you, my man? First I hear this, I can't believe. I say, no way. Not my man, Torque. That cracker bleeding out in the basement, he told me what's what. And he got no reason to lie. My brain ready to pop. It's too whack. Nobody make this up. Nobody would ever say that you.
Torque blacks out. Damn, not my boy Miles. We hear the distinct voice of Blackmore calling Torque to find him in his underground bunker. So he jumps into a hole in the ground, and we end up in solitary confinement, where we can hear the voices of long-gone inmates still being tormented. A new malefactor, the Isolationist, appears. Similar to the Festers from the previous game, when these enemies die, they can release more enemies from their stomach. Except, instead of rats, it's wretches. Basically cockroaches this time, which is 1,000,000 times worse. I don't have to explain their backstory, as it should be obvious with the name. Blackmore appears on TV, inviting Torque to the drowning pool. Sounds like a blast. I can't wait. Riley, an Irish Foundation soldier, is found alone after his team has been murdered. He assists Torque in finding an escape route, but ultimately chooses to stay behind, unwilling to become another statistic for Blackmore. Torque has more visions of Carmen, who hypes him up for his upcoming confrontation with Blackmore, and warns him that something feels off. This turns out to be true when Jordan, piloting a military helicopter, confronts them. She says that her men betraying her was part of the plan, and Torque was gullible enough to believe they'd ever turn on her. Even though they were shooting actual bullets at both of us and most definitely shot a rocket at us, but whatever. He destroys her helicopter and guns her down, never to hear from her again, thankfully. But he's not out of the woods yet. There's still one big problem, literally one big problem. And taking care of the horde makes Copperfield appear again to taunt Torque into diving into the hole to dig deeper into the issues at hand. At the bottom of the pit is a vomit green pool of water. Water that you could say is perfectly deep enough to drown someone in. Outside the pool are a caged Copperfield and the Creeper, with a special appearance from Dr. Killjoy. Here, he will recount all of Torque's morality choices in the game, and based on where you lean, you'll fight one of the two dickheads in this game. Since this is a good playthrough, Killjoy will show everyone Torque has saved, which will culminate in a boss battle with Copperfield, where he uses his dogs to chase Torque as he takes pot shots at him with his rifle. The irony is that once Copperfield is defeated, he is then feasted on by his own dogs. Sadly, if you're on a good path, it means that the Creeper is still free, and the same with the bad path and Copperfield. They really dropped the ball on that one. Blackmore will show up and talk to Corey about the drowning pool before asking him to put his brother Malcolm in, to which he obviously refuses. So angrily, Blackmore does it for him, and Torque jumps in to save him before he blacks out. Torque wakes up near a hellhole with a man named Ron Truman nearby, who seems to know way more about what's going on than he should. A cool fact is that all the notes from the first game and some random dialogue that you hear in this game are written and said by him. On the way to his childhood home, Dr. Killjoy appears and says he's done all he can for Torque, and now it's up to him to finish this thing. Sadly, it's the last time we'll see Killjoy, but he's definitely going to remain one of my favorite characters in gaming. Torque comes across Garvey's children's home. His home. This is the place where all our questions will be answered. In a room, scrawled all over the walls are pictures of malefactors and newspapers from all over time. Blackmore shows up and says the thing.
These are the ties that bind us.
And drops the bombshell that the reason Malcolm drowned his brother wasn't because of anger, but it was mostly due to being addicted to some rocks that Blackmore had his grunt sell him. In a totally unexpected twist, Blackmore reveals that he's actually not real. He's simply a manifestation of Torque's fractured mind, representing the evil alter ego. Blackmore never gave an order to kill Carmen, Malcolm, and Corey. He just wanted to scare them away from Torque. See, as a young kid growing up in a foster home, Torque was incessantly bullied, to the point where he had no choice but to fight back. Blackmore was born from this darkness since he wanted someone on his side to protect him, but over time, he would try to push Torque towards an evil path. Blackmore then drops another atomic bomb on Torque. All those blackouts weren't for nothing. When Torque blacks out, it's really Blackmore taking control over his body, and it's been Blackmore's goal the entire time to make that permanent. All that drug lord stuff, the man in Miles' bar that got beaten up, it was Torque's likeness doing that, but behind his eyes was Blackmore. No matter what, to everyone else, it was Torque doing these things, even if it's Blackmore steering the ship. What's even more weird is that Blackmore would essentially schedule problems ahead of time, so when Torque takes back over, he'll be the one dealing with the consequences. Carmen herself even started to notice something was off when Torque would have blackouts and turn into a completely different person. She figured it out later, which led to the divorce from Torque, and we know how that ends. According to Jordan, Blackmore had little time to show himself, but he was charismatic and smart enough to build his drug empire and make enough money to fund the foundation. As Jordan was a scientist, essentially studying evil, she quickly understood what ailed Torque and started to help Blackmore, since she herself says that she prefers Blackmore's personality over Torque's. I imagine her studying the malefactors comes from a place of infatuation with evil, to some degree, or maybe I'm just overthinking it. Since Blackmore is tired of sharing one body, he takes part in a fight to take over the mind. He summons the Horde to create infinite monsters on the roof of a building, where he can be damaged only by Torque's beast form. After a grueling effort, Torque weakens Blackmore, and he lies recoiled in pain as Torque approaches him, giving way to 3 different endings. In the neutral ending, Torque attempts to end Blackmore, but some energy stops him. Blackmore comments that neither of them could change each other, and so they'll just have to keep sharing the body as long as needed until one of them becomes the victor. In the evil ending, Torque will immediately be taken over with no remnants left, leaving Blackmore to rule Baltimore. Behind him, one last revelation. Jordan walks towards him as he says everything's better with an inside woman, before they share a... what's the opposite of passionate? Working as a team to carry out whatever nefarious plans they have left. Now in the good ending, Torque gives him a hand, but Blackmore screams, and for a split second we can see the evil beast inside of him. Blackmore then falls to his knees and admits defeat, since he's always played for all or nothing. And behind Torque, Carmen appears and tells him that the ties that bind them are too strong and that she never wants them to be apart, as they embrace each other in a hug. And while we never get to know which ending is canon and everything in the world might literally be falling apart, at least this part of him, the good part, despite all odds, prevailed. And that ends The Suffering, Ties That Bind. For me, this was an extremely disappointing sequel for a variety of reasons. First, the gameplay was overhauled to be more restricted, only fighting in corridors and being limited to only 2 weapons at a time. The game itself is woefully short. I beat it in 5 hours, and that was with me exploring everything to get footage for this video. Sure, you could replay it 2 more times, but the only differences are some abilities for the beast form and very few story differences. 1 different boss fight, but the worst offense, the worst decision this game makes is changing the health items to not be stackable. Like, why? This forces you to run frantically trying to find health when it gets low, and in some sections it crosses the line into sadistic, with some areas throwing multiple waves at you with only 1 or 2 health items. It wouldn't be that bad if Torque could withstand damage, but a single Gorger hit could knock off 50% of your health easily. You want to see how easy it is to die in this game? Here it is. It depresses me that this game has rushed written all over it, because the franchise was destined for greatness, and it seems the critics and fan sentiment agreed, because soon after this game dropped in 2005, it flopped hard, and Surreal would never make another game, since the rights were purchased by Warner Brothers in 2009, and the team at Surreal Software was integrated into Monolith, who we'll talk about sometime in the future. With Netflix beginning the acquisition of Warner Brothers in December of 2025, I wait patiently to see if this franchise will be returning in any shape. I wish I had better things to say about this game, but man, I've never felt so disappointed playing something before. Well, what do you think of The Suffering, Ties That Bind? What ending would you consider canon? Let me know down in the comments below. Also, don't forget to like and subscribe. I'm trying to reach 500 subscribers, so help me out if you want more content like this. I'll see you in the next video, where a Christmas Eve concert teaches New York about mitochondria. See you there.